So all winter long, we have all been waiting to get the boats back out there, and in a lot of parts of the country, they never really stop taking them out. But either way, we're waiting for that warm weather to bring those fish back to the banks where they start flooding, and fishing is just fun again. You don't have to be cold for freezing your fingers off, and that's what March is all about. It is about waves of pre-spawn fish, but it is also about cold snaps and those lingering cold weather periods that don't seem to want to leave yet. And March is also about muddy water, which can be an absolute pain, but it can also be a blessing if you're throwing the right baits. So what I want to do today is I want to break down my top 4 March baits that I'm going to be picking up and having on deck no matter where I go across the country. And these are the baits that I'm going to throw because I think they're going to catch me big fish, and I think they're going to catch me fish in all different conditions in the month of March. So let's dive into it right now. So the first bait's probably not going to be too big of a surprise to anybody, but it is one that I can do a little bit of everything with, and the biggest thing about it is it's going to get me big bites, and that is going to be a Rattle Trap. I like the 6th Sense Duke. That has been one of my absolute favorites, but the key with a Rattle Trap is having all different pitches, having some silent versions, having some loud ones, and having some of that mid-range, because this time of year there is a lot of people throwing power fishing baits for the reason that they work and they catch giant fish this time of year. Because like I said, we have those pre-spawn waves of fish flooding the banks every period of every full moon, every warming trend, and it can be absolutely phenomenal. And that's why I like throwing a Rattle Trap, because I can cover a ton of water with it. I can fish it through grass, I can yo-yo it off the bottom, I can kind of fish it in all different situations, but the key is it gets me big bites. With that loud presence in the water, you can catch some absolute giants in the pre-spawn in the month of March on a Rattle Trap. But this bait just fishes so well in so many different situations, I couldn't leave it out of my top 4. So now, let's get into bait number 2. Real quick guys, those of you guys that are new, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button to follow along with the channel. But let's get on to bait number 2. So bait number 2 is a personal favorite of mine. You guys that follow along with the channel have seen it over and over and over again, but it is an absolute fish catcher. And the biggest thing is it triggers bites. Yep, you guys guessed it. It is a jerkbait. This is a 6th Sense Provoke. And the reason that I like a jerkbait this time of year is because we still have those lingering cold fronts. We have those fish moving shallow, and sometimes when they get into those shallow water areas and it gets cold, they really do not want to eat. And so I like a jerkbait because it really triggers fish. You know, we have a lot of bait fish pushing shallow, and fish are just feeding, getting ready for that hard time in their life where they're going to be spawning. So they are feeding up. They're the fattest they're going to be, and that jerkbait absolutely triggers them. And the biggest thing is this is going to be a bait that gets me confidence to get some bites, but you can also catch some really big fish on this, especially with the advancements in forward-facing sonar. I can use this bait in a lot of different areas to catch fish that nobody else is even targeting. But the biggest thing with 1 and 2, these 2 first baits that I've talked about, you can cover a lot of water with it. And that's what I love about a jerkbait, is my ability to fish different depth zones utilizing different size jerkbaits to cover a ton of water and trigger fish into eating and just having a fun day out there on the water. So now let's get into bait number 3. Bait number 3 is probably one of the most overlooked bait categories out there in most of the country, unless you live on Lake Guntersville. That is going to be a flat-sided crankbait. It is no secret that cranking catches a ton of fish, especially in the pre-spawn, and it is just a great pattern to use the rest of the year as well. It catches fish all over the place. Just ask Kevin Van Dam. But the biggest thing is I use a flat-sided bait for the reason that it has a smaller vibration. You know, with so many people throwing power fishing baits this time of year, you know, it can really get overwhelming as far as those fish being in pressured areas, just shying away from all of that. So instead of having a wide wobbling bait, we want to finesse it down. This is a 6th Sense Finesse Flat 4. And what it does, it just covers a ton of water, doesn't put out as much vibration, and it fishes really good in that shallow water area. You know, I can deflect it around wood, rocks, grass. Doesn't really matter. I can fish it all over in there, and it's even silent, especially this one that I made. They typically have a little bit of a rattle, but I made this one silent. But it just is a little bit of a less intrusive bait that still can get you some really big bites, but the biggest thing is I can still cover water. I can change colors really easily, and I can just keep moving around to figure out where these big fish are funneling to, so that way I can get on top of them and catch a bunch of fish. But when you're in that colder water period, because in March typically that water, unless you're in Florida, that water is still in that 45 to 60, we'll call it, in that period, and so we really want to utilize those baits that stand out better in that cold water, and a flat-sided crankbait is one of those. So this works great on highland reservoirs, it works great on lakes like Guntersville, it works great even if you're in Florida. It catches fish all over the country. As always, guys, all the gear that I've talked about will be linked below, so that way you guys can get some of that. But let's get on to our last bait. That's bait number 4. So bait number 4 is one that probably has caught more fish than any other bait ever, and it's just a category of baits that I want to talk about, and that is swim baits. Right here we have a mag draft, but you can also throw a Kitech, like a 2.8, all the way up to an 8-inch mag draft, depending on the lake you're at, the size of the fish, and the forage that those fish are feeding on. A swim bait is just a phenomenal tool. Whether you have dirty water or not, you can still catch a ton of fish on it. You can catch absolute giant fish on it depending on what size bait you're going to throw. And you can just cover all different water depths in the column. You can catch them from 2 foot down all the way to 2 foot off the bottom in 50 feet of water. You know, it really doesn't matter. And the biggest thing is it gets little bites, it gets a lot of bites, but it also, like I said, gets big bites. And a lot of these baits that you've noticed, I can fish them in all different depths of the column, and that's no different with a swim bait. A swim bait is probably a personal favorite of mine when I get in areas that I know the fish are using, but there's a lot of pressure in the area. It is probably the most lifelike bait we have other than an actual minnow. You know, it has the most natural kick and roll to it, and those fish can track it for an extremely long ways before they want to eat it, and you can put it on a heavier head and absolutely bomb that sucker. So it is a finesse application that can get you some above average bites and get you a lot of bites, especially when you're fishing in a crowd, which is what we tend to find in March. Speaking of swim baits, be sure to check out this video I have linked up here where I break down all of my favorite rigging techniques for swim baits. It is a video you don't want to miss. I break down some unusual rigging techniques that will help catch you more fish out there in the water when you're throwing a swim bait. But thank you guys so much for watching. God bless, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.